He wanted to go in Iraq, and Mr. Ignatieff was supporting that also. That we do remember.
The fact remains, Mr. Harper, you're the first Prime Minister in the history of Canada to lose the seat that we were eligible to occupy on the Security Council of the United Nations. You spent, on the G20 summit, we had an opportunity to lead. You spent $1 billion in 72 hours, and there isn't a person in Canada who can remember a substantive outcome from that summit. And talking about Kairos, talking about aid agencies who work in Africa, you've muzzled them, you've shut them down. Anything you can't control, you want to shut down. That's no way to build international prestige overseas. These church organizations had worked in Africa for 30 years with support from the Canadian government, and for ideological reasons you shut them down. When Rights and Democracy, an independent organization trying to represent human rights around the world, gave you a little trouble, you basically destroyed the organization. So you can't lead in this country if you show so little respect for democracy. You've got to let different voices flourish in foreign affairs.
Mr. Ignatieff, I just recently was at an international meeting of Canadian NGOs dealing with foreign aid. That's what the government of Canada does. But let me talk a minute about the G8 and G20, because it has come up time and time again. We're in a global economy. A recession came to this country through no fault of our own because of forces in the global economy. The G8 and the G20 have been vital to respond to a global response to the crisis, to ensure we first didn't have a Great Depression, and now that we are coming out through a recovery. We set important goals in that summit, including deficit and debt reduction targets for the world that Canada will achieve well ahead of time. So, you know, in this day and age where you're in a global economy, you have to be part of global conferences, and you have to be leading those conferences. And frankly, the world thinks Canada is the country leading global recovery.
But the world is also asking, what happened to Canada? Why is it now that the government there is being cited with contempt? Why is it now being known as a government that is so secretive and won't allow information out for its citizens? Why can't we even have open debates about foreign policy issues instead of having groups and organizations like Kairos, Rights and Democracy, we could go through the list, being shut down? Yours is the most closed administration when it comes to discussing these issues. Let me ask you simply this. Will you support my suggestion that we meet and arrange with the Auditor General for that report on the funds for the G8, G20 to be released now that it's already been leaked in various versions? Let's have her final report released. Will you go along with that?
Well, I'd be absolutely happy to see the real report. Mr. Layton,
well, then bring it out.
Bring it out.
Well,
release it.
It's the Auditor General's report.
What are you afraid of?
It's not the government.
What are you waiting for?
This is the Auditor General's report. We encourage the Auditor General to release that report. We obviously don't like to see documents floating around. The Auditor General herself says cannot be relied on.
It looks like it takes a national debate to get a government document out of
Mr. Layton, you said,
from Mr. Harper.
Mr. Layton, you said how the world was looking at this situation right now. What the world is looking at right now and is saying, Canada's got the strongest recovery of any country on earth, and suddenly it's plunged into a fourth election in 7 years, and Canadians don't know why. Canadians don't know why we're doing this, but I tell you what we do have to do. We have to get Parliament back to work, focused on the economy, passing the good measures for people that were in our budget, that people we can afford without raising your taxes. That's what the country has to do.
Canadians know exactly why we're having an election. Mr. Harper. We're having an election because you didn't tell Parliament the truth about your budget costs, about any of the numbers. They became unbelievable. The Parliament of Canada could not have confidence in anything you said, including on international aid. Minister Oda inserted a knot into a document, falsified a document, misled the House of Commons, and eventually the confidence of the whole Parliament was lost. That's why we're having an election, because you didn't tell Canadians the truth, because you abused democracy. That's why we're having an election.
That's simply not correct. You know, the numbers in our budget have been verified by private sector experts. They've not been challenged. These numbers are accurate. We're having an election because the other three political parties saw an opportunity to go after the government. That's fine. I don't think Canadians agree. I think Canadians think we should not be focused on parliamentary squabbling, on censure motions, and these sorts of things. We should be focused on the economy. That's what we're doing. We've got good things in the budget to help pensioners, to help families, to help unemployed workers, to help our manufacturing sector. These are the things that Parliament should be dealing with and passing.
Mr. Harper, you said quite a few times when you were the leader of the official opposition, that a prime minister, especially a prime minister of a monetary government, should always respect the decisions made by the House of Commons, by the elected members of the House of Commons. Otherwise, that prime minister would act with no moral at all. It was immoral not to respect the decision of the House of Commons. You said that, and you were right at that time. How come that now, since you're prime minister of a monetary government, every single time you don't agree with a decision made by the House of Commons, you don't remember what you were preaching at the time? I'd like to have an explanation on that.
Well, Mr. Duceppe, this government, we have run the longest minority government in Canadian history. We've got a lot of things done. We don't always agree. That's just the reality of Parliament. This government attempts to listen to all the other parties. Our recent budget had elements the other parties had asked for, but can we say we're all going to agree? No, we can't. But when you're the government, you ultimately have to take responsibilities for the decision, be accountable to Canadian people. That's what we're running on, our strong economic record, and that's why we are asking for another mandate.
On what you were saying, not at all.
Mr. Layton and Mr. Ignatieff.
And we've had so many instances now where the House of Commons has put forward important ideas that you've simply turned around and rejected. And sometimes, I'm thinking particularly of our climate change bill, for example, went through the House of Commons twice. And yet you used the Senate, which you packed with your friends and defeated candidates and fundraisers, some of whom are up on fraud charges now. And you used that Senate to defeat a bill that called for accountability of no matter which party would be in power in Canada, so that we could have a climate change plan that would actually move us forward. It's such a disrespect for democracy, Mr. Harper, that it really isn't acceptable.
Let me explain our position on that bill. We've been strongly opposed to that bill throughout. The reason is that bill has no actual measures to achieve objectives. It just sets targets. You can't achieve something by just setting a target. You can't just pass a bill declaring the unemployment rate to be 2%. You actually have to have the measures that will achieve that. When it comes to climate change, we're working internationally on the Copenhagen Accord, which now is a framework to include all emitters, related industries. That's something the opposition asked for. And we're continuing through this budget to invest billions of dollars in green energy and energy efficiency.
Mr.
That's what Canadians wanted us to do. That's what Canadians wanted us to do.
You've got to know where you're going if you're ever going to get there. And that's what that bill was all about. And you don't want us to be taking strong action on climate change. I think most Canadians know that. You prefer to subsidize your friends in the big oil companies.
Gentlemen, got to be fair with the time. Mr. Ignatieff.
The original question was about your vision of Canada in the world. You have failed to win a seat on the Security Council. You achieved nothing at the G8, G20. You shut down every independent organization that's trying to do good in Africa or Asia if it disagrees with your ideology. If we're going to have a foreign policy, it's got to be based on democratic values. Respect for Canadians when they go overseas, respect for what they're trying to do, not trying to muzzle people, shut people down. Let some flowers bloom here. Let democracy breathe. Let it live. If you're going to promote it abroad, as we should, you've got to respect it at home. You're a man who will shut down anything you cannot control. That's the core of your at home. You're a man who will shut down anything you cannot control. That's the core of your vision of government. And it's inimical. It's hostile to the values of democracy upon which this country is based.
Well, Mr. Ignatieff, this is simply not true. Canada is one of the most forceful promoters of freedom, democracy, human rights, the rule of law at home and abroad. When it comes to our foreign aid is delivered largely through private organization and international partners. That's largely how we do it. We work with other people. The idea that we're shutting them down or muzzling, this is just simply not based on any fact. Canada, I say right now, the important initiative we have right now on child and maternal health, we've attracted billions of dollars to deal with the health problems of the most vulnerable people on the planet, and we have all other countries, international organizations working with us. That's the kind of thing Canada is really doing in the world. Well, in Parliament, all we have is this kind of mudslinging, accusations, bickering back and forth. We're out there actually making a difference in the world. That's what Canadians expect of us.
Gentlemen, you want last 20 seconds on that?
Yes.
20 seconds.
I look at the Foreign Affairs Department budget in 2008-2009.